want to introduce Brother Joe Paul.
Good morning. That's exactly what I'm hoping to accomplish this morning. Just to chat with the family and bring us back to center. I think Deanna gave us the head awareness, the cerebral and factual approaches to where we may have slept at the wheel or where things slid up underneath our noses. But I just want to talk to our hearts. And so, Cheryl, obviously, the relationship I share with you and so many others, Brad Carson, Don, just LV, like all y'all have played a role in my perspective and the grounding that makes me twin. You know, just all y'all have influenced the truth of the work, to not get pulled into the politics, to not get pulled into position or not get pulled into taking sides, but always holding the equitable ground of truth to make sure that the voices of those that don't necessarily get in those rooms are really recognized. Let me, off top, I'm E22842, California State prisoner, and community residents of the Crenshaw district, otherwise known as the Rolling 60s. That's where I came out of. That's the cloth that I was cut from. And thank God for Berlin and Althea Paul, who taught me about Jesus Christ and who taught me how to believe beyond what was around me, to hope for something bigger than myself. And so I want to kind of start in that grounding space. As I was thinking about this invitation, and anytime Big Sis reaches out and says, hey, bro, I need you to tap in and kind of share where you are right now and speak on a couple of things. It's my honor to do that. So God put something on my heart. I want to be obedient, first of all, to that, and then, get into some of the subject matter that, I've been asked to speak on. So the first thing is this: I want to talk to your spirits. God put something in my heart that I believe is going to touch you, where this grounding needs to be placed out of. If it don't apply, let it fly. But I'm going to give it to those who I believe are in that space. And out of the book of Jeremiah, in the 32nd chapter, in the 42nd verse, God gave me this for y'all. He said, this is what the Lord says: as I brought all this great calamity on this people, so I will give them all the prosperity I have promised them. As I brought all this great calamity on this people, so I will give them all the prosperity. And that word literally means help along the way. Don't mean getting rich. It means help along the way. And you want God's help along the way. Because when he stands with you, who could be against you? Period. And so I'm speaking that into your spirit now from the foundation of this conversation and what I share with you, because I believe where my head is now and the direction that God is taking me in this work. And Cheryl's 100% right. She's been a critical voice a voice in the wilderness at moments in time when I was at a crux of decision making. What should I do and how should I move? And I don't know. And Big Sister step in and be like, that's a good look. That's a good look. I think that's a good look. Like, run that. And I'm like, okay. And then I'm talking about when I moved through that little tiny door that thing represented on the surface. It was just wide open, oasis and paradise on the other side. We changed stuff. Needles got moved. Circumstances shifted. Brad Carson, the same exact way. Brad would show up and I was going through some consternation, and all of a sudden, boom, what should I do, big bro? And Brad laced me. Bring this person to the table. Bishop Jones or Bishop McLennan, whoever it was, and things would happen. And it would just mind blowing. Like, wow, all I'm doing is believing. And we're moving the needle at national levels. Kamala Harris stage, like, you're invited to be my guest at the State of the Union. Like, me? For real? Okay. I'm going to show up, but I'm just still Crenshaw district. I'm just going to keep it 100 with you. And so with that being said, I want to lay the foundation. So that's Jeremiah 32, verse 42. Get that in your spirit and run with it however God leads you. Jeremiah 32, verse 42. All this calamity, this great calamity brought on his people, so it will give you all the prosperity he promised you. Whatever God has put in your spirit as a promise, he's going to prosper you to achieve that thing. He's going to give you help along the way. That doesn't mean it's going to look like the prosperity is there. You're going to have to move by faith. You're going to have to press hard lines. And most of us who are willing to take penitentiary chances at points in our lives, or have loved ones or affiliates that we were associated with that was moving in those directions, that same measure of courage has to be transmuted in this space. That energy has to be reformulated and put into this space. And I promise you, everything you heard in the beginning, those seats that we weren't necessarily invited to in those spaces, they're going to come to us. I promise you that, because I'm a witness to it. I don't go out and solicit nobody. I don't know social media. I don't do none of that. But God constantly puts me in the right space with the right answers and the right solutions that let my voice and the voices of those I represent, including my space in LARRP with Troy and Lynn and everyone else that's associated with us, that those things really matter for the people that don't necessarily get to be in that space. So that's that, Jeremiah 32, verse 40. And so I want to give a little history, and then I want to go back to where that represents now. So think about this, because this is what I've been considering when we talk about reentry. The last 12 years, and Brad gave a little history to it, certainly Deanna gave history to it, we've seen some of the most robust strides in our work to impact mass incarceration, including the book by Michelle Alexander being a cornerstone, including the work by Brian Stevens and all of the others that have spoken out in this space from platforms of media and TV and so forth. Scott Budnick, the work that he's doing over at ARC, just all of these different spaces. But when we think about the laws that have cornerstoned our efforts, I'll go back to like 2007, right? We didn't have ban the box. We didn't have felon voter rights. We didn't have the ability for felons to sit on juries. We were pulling on federal laws like the EEOC's Title VII. We were pulling on the Fair Credit Reporting Act. We were pulling on all kinds of laws to justify the position that we were taking. And it was still very narrow because it was based on race or gender or national origin. It didn't really make sense about your felony directly. We had to impose these things on our community and hold a hard line, right? And so that's where the faith community came in with hiring fairs. That's where we started pushing lines on the work in the City of L.A. at the time with Via Ragosa around hiring ordinances that provided for local hire or carve-outs within these hard-to-serve communities or individuals, and taking bits and pieces of progress. And so we ended up with, your AB 109s, which I'm going to get back to that because I think the epicenter of that and the origin of how it evolved is really the gist of what I want to leave you with today, at least. The Prop 36s of the world, where nonviolent three strikers were able to actually have action at coming home again. And we saw hundreds of folks from state prison finally get a chance at daylight for that particular bill. We had your Prop 47s, your Prop 57s, even Prop 64s, working with Dr. Weber on our ban the box law statewide, working with Nancy Skinner on voter rights and the access to the polls and so forth and so on, being able to sit on juries and the like. So now in 2021, having that much progress and that much sustained effort, where we find ourselves is not in the same conversation, hopefully, around reentry as we were in 2007, 2006, 2009, right? We should be in a place of now gaining and advancing on those outcomes, where instead of speaking in the space of intervention or even the effect of mass incarceration in the sense of those returning home and traditional idea of reentry, now the idea is to get ahead of it and build healthy communities and go to the origins of where we know people continue to suffer through that create the need to express themselves in crime, whether it's through substance abuse, whether it's through robbery, or whether it's through acts of violence like we're seeing in our community right now with these young people who are lost, killing each other, especially in the areas that you guys are representing with this CAP committee right now. And so I'm preaching to the choir in that regard. So, no matter how much work we do to circumvent alternatives to incarceration and things like that, if the people most affected by the conditions that have persisted are not involved, then our work is in vain. I'm in the communities, Nikki and others who are in areas touching real lives, Twin, working with people who are really out here. These are the young gunners. These are the shooters that ain't coming to no community meeting, period. I don't care what the incentive is. These dudes is active. And so not having them at the table, not really engaging them and embracing them and loving on them with the love of the Lord or whatever your spiritual conviction is, to show up and make them feel like, you matter. And this hurt that you're feeling, I feel it with you. We all got loved ones whose blood is spilled, and we prayerfully are believing that just like Abel's blood spoke from the ground and spoke to God's ear, and he vindicated him. So we believe that the blood of these young people who have spilled in these streets is crying out just as loud right now. That's what we believe. And so having them at the table and really giving honest space for them. Example, I was with a young man just a few days ago through a phone call, through a iPhone, a little FaceTime. This dude he's from 60s. And he, full-blown active gang member, but I wanted to hear from their voice. These are the shooters. They're not coming to no meetings. This little dude is so committed to his banging that he got hoods whacked out on his face. So he Hoover's on his face whacked out, ETG whacked out. Like, what drove you to the point of feeling that your life was such at an end that the only value you have is leaving a mark for your hood to remember that you existed, because you're going to go out with a blaze of glory? This young man was brilliant. Having the conversation with him and hearing where his heart was, but knowing that he feels lost to this degree, that he's expressing himself with it on his face, it broke my heart. And I asked the question, if help was to come, what would that help look like? He said, man, I'm going to put my hood on the map when I leave here. That's the only thing that matters to me. I want to be remembered for what I did for my set. I ain't hearing none of those conversations at the Board of Supervisors. I'm not hearing that with the sheriff. I'm not hearing that with probation. With all due respect, they all care, but these dudes are telling me they wish the police will pull them over. So how many of those incidences have to occur before all our work with ATI and all of this is just flushed down the toilet? And we give these conservatives that believe that people like George Gascon's progressive ideologies are ruining our society. It's only going to take one or two of them, and we way back on the other side of tough on crime. So what you guys are doing and reaching to community and really going into the trenches and feeling the pulse of where the community is and that hurt that transcends where we've been with COVID, that transcends where we've been with the George Floyds. We've been experiencing George Floyd's since the 60s, 70s, 50s. Let alone what we went through with Jim Crow and lynching. Come on. This is a same old song thing. And so what you guys are doing is very important. So I want to move my conversation as we establish the fact, reentry, as we have provided the support over the last 10 years or so, 12 years, and all the groundwork that was laid before that, like with Brad and the peace treaties and all the other things that led to the impetus through this last decade, where we saw a lot of the momentum result in real solid laws, right, that we're still working to implement. Now we have to move that needle to a point of how do we swing back around and work from a perspective of, we know through the social determinants of health, we know through the Strengthening Families framework, these 5 protective factors, we know through risk, need, responsivity in the work of reentry, that there are mechanisms and pathways that are already framed, that if we practice some of these things out and move in the collective ecosystem of what's fueling the issues from, I'm talking about 0 to 5 up through middle school. Like, if we don't get ahead of these youngsters by the time they get to Horace Mann or John Muir, they banging, full-blown active with it. And now you're talking about, the exploitation of, juveniles are not this and juveniles are not going to be that. Well, these dudes are figuring out ways to make sure that young homies ride these cases. They're not trying to use the advantage that we have the intent of bringing these laws into the space. And that's just keeping it real. That's just honestly what's going on. They're not, it's like Prop 47. We went with the intent of raising the threshold of, petty theft and grand theft. The homies didn't get that memo. So they started running up in these drugstores and CVS's and pillaging them, knowing that it was just going to be a slap on the wrist, to the point where they had to go back and put an addendum to that bill that says, well, these kind of crimes, we're going to exclude them because they got rings of people out here now who are robbing to the degree it's creating felony level issues. These are the things that I feel you guys are really engaged in that are significantly valuable, because you're touching the people that normally don't get the memo. And it's only after the fact that we try to appeal to them and plead that, hey man, there's some options out here. But by that time, the momentum is moving in a direction. It's hard for folks to want to hear you after you didn't include me from the beginning. The very conversation that we were talking about from Diana's presentation. So I want to go back. I'm gonna take us back way back. Now, most of us on this call weren't included in this conversation when we talk about founding fathers, but the principles and tenets that originated this country and made it this great experiment is relevant to us now. Thank God for the 13th and 14th Amendments. We're in. So what do we do with it? So I want to share a couple of quotes to kind of set the framework for that thought. And then, I'll ask you guys some questions about what you feel about what I'm saying, because I really want to get your feedback, because this is where my heart is. So when you think about founding fathers such as Thomas Jefferson, right? I'm going to quote something that that was captured out of his thought around the inception of this country and the tenets and the principles that really established what this America, this great experiment was supposed to be, this democracy, right? And in his first inaugural address, he represented this thought. He stated, "These principles form the bright constellation which has gone before us and guided our steps through an age of revolution and reformation. The wisdom of our sages and the blood of our heroes have been devoted to their attainment. They should be the creed of our political faith, the text of our civil instruction, the touchstone by which to try the service of those we trust, and should we wander from them in moments of error or of alarm, let us hasten to retrace our steps and to regain the road which alone leads to peace, liberty, and safety." And those principles he was talking about were thoughts that came from folks like John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Thomas Hobbes. These are natural rights. These are where we form this idea of this creator endowing us with certain inalienable rights, that among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. My question always goes back to, well, where's the God of that creation? Or where's that creator in the notions and the thoughts that still establish the idea of these inalienable rights? Because we're still suffering through as second-class citizens. There is a distinction of position that clearly is not balanced. So we throw words around like equity. We throw words around like justice. Bottom line between those words is balance and fairness. It doesn't mean that if we all get a piece of this pie, we all get an equal piece of this pie, that it was fair. No, that's not justice. If we've struggled and been behind the eight ball, redlining and discriminatory practices in lending and businesses, we're still fighting with that. So we were just on the horn with Governor Newsom 2 Mondays ago, still talking about, well, since Proposition 209 failed, what do we do to make sure that there's equal distribution and access for us as minorities, Black people particularly, to come to the table and actually have a right to participate in this economic boom that's going on? I found out just the other day that there's a surplus of about $20 billion in the state budget, because Netflix and all these other people were booming in this crisis that we call COVID. Right? Where's that money go to? How do we get an equal distribution of it? How does all this ATI and fairness of communities of color right? Particularly Black communities, Black Lives Matter to who? I'm asking the question. Black Lives Matter to who? Because our folks are still getting knocked down in these streets on a daily basis, period. And so that's where I really feel you guys stand in the place up. I'm gonna go on because I want to get to something. So here is Benjamin Franklin. This is Benjamin Franklin, Mr. Kite with the electric, All right. So Benjamin Franklin is said after they had finished the first constitutional convention and the structuring of our government by the group of founding fathers that met in Philadelphia. He was quoted as saying, when someone asked, what kind of government have we established? He said, a republic, if you can keep it. We have a republic. So just for y'all who don't know this, here's what the word republic means. It's a state in which the supreme power rests in the body of the citizens entitled to vote, and is exercised by representatives chosen directly or indirectly by them. Let me quote that one more time. A state in which the supreme power rests in the body of the citizens entitled to vote and is exercised by representatives chosen directly or indirectly by them. This is where we have to move. You got to vote. This is why we fought so hard. Sure, you were right there in the beginning, going inside of the jails and pressing hard lines to make sure that right for those who were innocent until proven guilty and those that didn't have felony convictions that were at the state level at that time were able to actually exercise their right within the citizenry of this republic. And then we taught them and we gave them details and we really educated them civically to understand where they are. My thought had always been, you got homies that are sitting up in jail that turn into Johnny Cochran once they fight in a case, who never even read a book before they got into jail. We call them jailhouse lawyers. So why not use that same motivation while we have this sequestered environment to really get these dudes on deck to understand what it means to participate in the franchise and really encourage them to exercise that line that we need to press and use them as motivators to their young homies about what that power is. I don't care if you banging, but that don't take you away from the citizenry that you represent and the voice that needs to be represented in and your contribution to this society that we're trying to build. Because America is still evolving. It's still a work in progress. And now that we're at the table, how do we stay there? And that's why I think the work that you guys are doing through the CAP is so important. So I'm gonna go to something else, and I think I'm gonna contemporize this. Well, no, let me give you one last thing, just for context to that origin, right? So one last thing. This is a quote from the Declaration of Independence. Common, very familiar, first paragraph says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain and unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Here's a part that typically is overlooked, though, that's critical. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers by the consent of the governed. The consent of the governed. We have to educate ourselves. We have to prepare ourselves. And we have to go and we have to speak with our represented government. That's at the city council level. That's at the neighborhood council level. That's at the board of supervisors level. Think about this, particularly at the board of supervisors level. You got 5 individuals representing a county of 10 million people. That's a lot of power for 5 individuals. Just think about the city of L.A. City of L.A. has 15 representatives in their city council. One city. Now, it's huge. I don't know, 4 million people in the city, but 5 representatives for 10 million people, and you got a handful of people that have their ear. That's why we continue to see the things that we see. Everybody has a right to have that conversation. Troy and I, my boy Troy Vaughn, many of you know Pastor Troy Vaughn, we just had a very intimate conversation with LA County Supervisor Holly Mitchell just the other morning. We're not special. We're not, oh, that's you guys. We just exercise the right that we have as citizens of this county to have these types of conversations. And we hopefully are bringing enough insight from the collective experience of the body of people that we represent, that we're addressing it in a way that really shares the collective conscience that we're experiencing, And I just really want to encourage you guys that don't feel like that's them and this is us. They're big and we're small. We're not. We're not. We're big. We're big. You got a woman like Cheryl Branch. Cheryl Branch is a go hard rider. She'd have been my co-defendant back in the 80s if we didn't knew each other. That's real. I'm just saying. Thank God for deliverance. But the reality is you got somebody that, and Cheryl's always been a person that says either you can get the goons or you can get the civilized group. Which one you want to choose? Because we can press both of them in the room. We choose to bring the civilized ones in the room and talk legitimately and honestly on strategy. But we can bring the goons in the room too, and they can rebel rouse. And it's good to have that type of person who understands the balance. So I want to use something that I think is significant. I was, thinking about this idea of the COVID situation, right? So testing, and many of you that I'm looking at participated in our Staying Safe Over the Holidays initiative, the sub-grants that we offered, and thank you for everything you did. You made that a huge success. And, now the county's back at the table. We're working to negotiate another round of it to push that back out and hopefully bring these smaller agencies to the table to give you a chance to really to eat and to serve your community in a healthy way. But in thinking about COVID and thinking about this herd immunity that they're working to actually arrive at, and that's through testing, it's through social distancing, it's through the proper exercise of washing hands and, PPE and so forth and so on, wearing masks, and then the vaccine. The whole intent is to arrive at what they call herd immunity. And so let me give you what the definition of herd immunity means, because I'm going to use it in the context of these lived experience folks and an organization like we're dealing with here. So herd immunity is a form of indirect protection from infectious diseases that can occur when some diseases when a significant or sufficient percentage of the population has become immune to an infection, whether through vaccination or previous infections, thereby reducing the likelihood of infection for individuals who lack immunity. Immune individuals are unlikely to contribute to disease transmission, disrupting chains of infection, which stops or slows the spread of disease. The greater the proportion of immune individuals in a community, the smaller the probability that non-immune individuals will come into contact with an infectious individual. That's powerful. We're talking about herd immunity. Now, think about this. Community health workers, lived experience folks, peer navigators, gang interventionists. These are individuals that we label collectively as folks with lived experience. What I'm saying is they've been exposed to the infectious disease of poverty. They've gone through the suffering, like my boy LV, 3 decades in prison. Others that have gone through all kinds of the disease of crack selling. I'm not talking about just using, I'm talking about the addiction of selling crack, making money off of the suffering of other people. We've gone through all of these infectious episodes, and now we've come out on the other side immune, and we have the ability to go back in and try to inoculate or vaccinate through knowledge. We're injecting vaccination into the minds and hearts of our people by our own surviving of the suffering of being infected by all of this stuff now. We're seeking to create herd immunity in our community through organizations like the CAP and the efforts that are going on. We're seeking to take individuals with lived experience and say they are carrying in their antibodies the ability to create serums that can be translated into vaccines that could be disseminated at massive scales to communities that are normally ostracized, just like we're experiencing with COVID. Just like we're experiencing with COVID, the disproportionate effect of COVID on deaths and infection rates within the Black community is just absurd. And brown communities for sure, and API communities for sure. And so I really appreciate the fact that you guys are up on a Saturday morning when you could be doing a million different things. But you took the initiative based on the fact that you have been inoculated from this virus that's killing our communities, with young people feeling they need to put their enemies' hoods on their face to say that this is killer, this is killer, this is killer, this is killer, when they really just want to hug. Bottom line, there's not one lifer I met with, not one, not even Big Fee, who was sitting on the road for a long time. None of these dudes I've talked to wanted to end up in that position they ended up in. There's not one cat. Not one. I can't think of one dude I met when I met with hundreds of dudes, helped hundreds of dudes come home from prison, hundreds, and fighting for a bunch of them right now still to come home. They said to me, I was with that from the get-go and I wanted to hurt people. Not one. And so we have something on us and in us that comes through us that is the solution. But it means we gotta play this game. We gotta play the game. I'm not a political person at all, but I will play politics. Period. If I was able to do it and survive the streets as a young man, you don't think I'd do it for my people today? You're not gonna outthink me in a room. That's not gonna happen. I do all of my homework just like we did when we was on the streets. That's the only way you survive. Get your information up. Know where the money is. Brad Carson told me a long time ago, follow the money. Follow the money. Follow the money. That's a fact. You can't escape when you follow the money. And so I think with leadership like you have, with fearless organizers and community like you have, every one of y'all on this call that I'm looking at, I mean, serious. What can we not do is the question. And so really organizing around a central theme. And I think that central theme right now is saving the lives of these young people that are dying. I went on a ride along 2 weeks ago in Compton with Captain LaTanya Clark and with Councilwoman Emma Sharif. They took me through their communities where these gang shootings had occurred, and then where all the retaliation points had happened in a 36-hour window, just so I can get a good sense of Compton. I was out in Pasadena with Big Preach and some of the cats from the Pasadena Divil Lanes, and they did the same thing. They walked me through their turf and showed me what was going on. And it's like COVID. It's an infectious spread of violence that we got to get ahead of. And so I think what you guys are doing and what you have access to, and certainly, if I'm here on this morning, I'm here permanently. Whatever I can do to help and whatever I can do to bring, accesses and rooms that I stand inside of to this group, by all means, whether it's through LARRP, through our faith community, whatever it may be, to position us as a collective voice that we stand in solidarity, that this has to stop, that our youngsters deserve better, and that we are a conduit to help that better get to them until they can stand on their own 2 feet, just the way this herd immunity situation works, then I'm with it. And so I just want to open the floor just for some feedback and some thoughts to points that were shared, particularly around some of the fundamental things. And we can get into the thoughts around, your Jean-Jacques Rousseau's and your John Locke's and your Thomas Hobbes around the social contract and And these fundamental principles that really, if we can adopt them and understand where they originate from, if we can go back in and read the Constitution, it's boring, but it's vital. You got to look at what your amendments are in each one of them. And how do we amend an amendment? Because I'm with Dorsey Nunn right now. We need to look at this 13th Amendment. Why are we still having a condition of servitude in America when that was abolished with the 13th Amendment? I mean, abolish it completely. Don't leave no caveats in there that leave us where we can still get caught up. And now you'll create black codes and all the other things through that Reconstruction era that left us still in the same position now 200 some years later. Eliminate it completely. This is why I support what Jay Jordan and the team up at CSJ are doing around time done. Time is done. Let's shut this down. That's the hard line I want to press. So I just want to hear from you guys and make sure I'm not drifting into some way out space in my thinking and really just find out where our solidarity is. What's up, Don?
When you first started talking and you were talking about the gangs, LV and I had a conversation last week. I have retainers in my mouth, you guys, so I may pronounce my words a little off. And LV was saying something. Remember this conversation we had last week, LV? And LV was stating about, his experience as a gang member, what he was feeling, where the mindsets of these young men are at. And he was so on point of what he was saying. And I'm listening to you. And, I was in a conference Thursday with Voca, and it was 2 white guys on there, and they said that they were gang interventionists. I'm like, okay, here we are.
Motorcycle gang.
Saying that they're gang interventionists, but do not have the life experience or the mindset to understand where these things are coming from. And so just now, while you were talking, this came to my mind with some of us on here. I know this was something that Cheryl had wanted to do, but COVID hit, so we had to pivot, and I don't know what's going on with it in regards to you wanted to do something for a gang workshop or conference or something like that. But this came to mind. Mm-hmm. If the agencies, the grind stewards, we put like $500 together and make our own infomercial, like with you talking about gangs, and just like little snippets of bits and pieces, and then send it out to these other agencies to let them know, like, here are the real people that are experiencing it. Just a little bit. You don't have to give them the whole resolve, but just enough to say, well, we need to consider this person to come in and talk. We have to kind of change it up, because they're saying that they're the professionals, but really the people that are the professionals are the ones that are like here at these gatherings, and we're not at those places where we can make an impact. So I think we probably need to put our monies together and do a small little infomercial ourselves, and then email it to these people who are in power, for to get us to the table, to get you to the table, to get you to the table. Let me give you a
thought, Don. Let me give you a thought. You're spot on with your rationale with this. And let me give you a thought, because I've just found this out a week or two ago. So, and I'm going to use this example to really honor your point. So I found out, and this is something we got to lift up, y'all. So social media, right? The Instagrams, I'm not so much Facebook, but like the Twitters and really Instagram from what I've been told, is a conduit for these social media beefs between these gangs. And really, it's a lot of in-hood fighting that's going on. It's like civil wars amongst these sets, but they're doing it on social media, and then it spills into reality. Dudes get pulled up on and then bust on. That's just how it's going, right? Mm-hmm. So the question was asked, why can't we hold these social media sites accountable to block a lot of this rhetoric that's going on, just the way they did when they blocked Donald Trump? Or we were even getting pushback on pushing out at massive scales the COVID testing that we're doing amongst the community. Like, why would y'all block that, right? And Facebook did that. We're working with our state legislature right now to eliminate that. But I think, to your point, if these youngsters can use social media to such a high degree to present and perpetuate the violence that they're exacting on each other, we certainly can do this from an offsetted position. And like cats like LV and cats like Big Preach and cats like Twin or Big U or others that really have been with that life for a long time and have transformed themselves, if they really push out, content or information that not just says don't live like this, because, think about it, when LV, when you was 14, 15, when you was really active with the life, what was you going to hear with somebody telling you don't be this way, right? So it's not or Twin, like who would have told you what to do at 15, like for real? So it's not about saying not, but it's definitely about saying there's some alternatives. And I think as we push that out, as we create, like working with dudes like Big John, we're creating real opportunities for employment. I saw somebody really sharing the chat around social enterprises, taking this ingenuitive spirit of youngsters and connecting it to real substance. And then using, our arenas, whether Cheryl mentioned SBA, we got Victor Parker over at the SBA that can move needles for us. We got cats like Joe Rozon at the Slauson, Vermont Economic Development Corp. We need to, use these accesses to then turn around and use people like the LA Chamber of Commerce and others to say, what are y'all doing to help our communities? And really have pathways, incubation academies, if you will, that not only help nonprofits to grow, but help small businesses to grow. So we create an infrastructure, or at least an economic infrastructure, that we can become self-sufficient. The one thing that I think a lot of times occurs is we show up and we think the government is an end-all be-all for funding. So we get an idea around a nonprofit, and then we want to go after grants. But to Cheryl's point, we don't have the infrastructure for it. They've created all kind of hoops that keep us on the outside. There's not a lot of mechanisms like a community partners that you can go underneath and, have them support you and develop your organization until you really are standalone, capable and so forth. But, we just have to start where we are. And I think what you guys are tapped into right now is that's exactly right. The incubation system. That's what CAP can literally be. You take real life issues from your communities, you lift those real life issues up to your respective elected officials. You show your pathways of solutions. You put your framework behind it, whether it be a constitutional framework, just like those inmates did that pushed that hard line and created the initial push to depopulate the prisons because of the overcrowded conditions. That was an 8th Amendment and a 14th Amendment push. They were brilliant for coming that route. It was cruel and unusual punishment, right? And so they leveraged that and they actually won. And, it took COVID to really exercise the depopulation. Now we're beneath the 100,000 mark in the prisons. And there's all kind of pathways, whether it be through the Council on Criminal Justice and Behavioral Health that's working with CDCR at this point in time, or whether it's the BSCC, who you guys really need to know, the Board of Community Corrections and BSCC, Board of Corrections and Community something. And those are the funding sources. CCJBH is a funding source. BSCC is a funding source. Really bringing your solutions to the table and advocacy is huge. And I think what we were doing, Nikki was involved with the voter registration stuff. Sheriff obviously been involved through LAM with voter registration, obviously LARRP with voter registration, being able to show voter blocks and being able to show that you have a contingency of people. Don, you've been involved with the voter registration stuff at all levels, obviously Brad and others. But I think really having a strategic model that lays out a good, better, best, a beginning, middle, end, a crawl, walk, run, however you want to look at it, that moves you forward is huge to lifting up where your argument or where your conversation can be to the elected officials that at least need to have you on their radar.